While the judges heard the presidential petition, attempts to try this case in the public gallery were many. But now, while the judges have delivered their full and final verdict, the fate of the bench now hangs in the balance after petitions against individual judges were lodged. Barely a week after the 7 judges of the Supreme Court delivered their full judgments on the presidential petition, newsrooms would receive a tip.
Last night, being informed there will be a big story at the Supreme Court at 11. But there was no information on what it would be. Editors and reporters scaffolded to cover the next big story, preparing for news that had the potential to change the future of the Supreme Court. There was this other message that started doing the rounds that the 2 dissenting judges were going to hold an explosive press conference about quote-unquote underhand dealings that may have taken place to get the majority judges to rule as they did. I mean, that, as a journalist, is what one of my bosses would describe as a juicy story. So everyone was there, you know, ready, because it was inconceivable, a judge to hold a press conference, a judge at the Supreme Court. So we were waiting. Well, we now all know that did not happen. What ended up happening was a politician from Jubilee came with a petition and, of course, received this coverage that was, by everybody, ready, live. And that was the intention with those that were misleading us before. Ngunjiri Wambugu, a newly elected MP, secured the top news spot of the day. He managed to be live on every news channel, announcing his bid to challenge the neutrality of the Chief Justice.
So now we have actually seen what can only be called a judicial coup, where the Kenyan people have decided that they want Uhuru Kenyatta as president. And then the Chief Justice, without explaining why, has decided that that election was not fair. It needed to be redone again.
But President Uhuru Kenyatta would eventually plead with Ngunjiri to stand down, owing to the political tensions in the country, prompting Ngunjiri to shelve his petition.
Wachana na hiyo watu bana. Acha kufuata hawa watu. Leave them alone. Sisi tumekubali kurudi kwa uchaguzi. Wacha sisi tu focus na kwenda kutafuta kura ya mwananchi.
But that was just the tip of the iceberg. A week later, enters Derek Ngumu, a director with a local NGO claiming to have a strong case against 2 judges of the bench. Standard newspaper journalist Mwaniki Munuhe got wind of the big petition deposited at the Judicial Service Commission.
As journalists, you build sources, network, people you depend on to get information. So I have my own sources within judiciary, within parliament, within government. So a friend of mine from Judicial Service Commission called me. And I could not take that phone call because I was in the middle of a meeting. But he called me again and told me, can you call me now, this moment? So I called back. He told me, there's something you may want to look at. It might interest you. So I said, is it something that can wait, or do you want me to come now? He told me, if you wait, it might cost you.
Mwaniki's source was spot on. It was a petition with damning allegations.
Well, it was a very interesting story about, you know, this case was a very high voltage case. When I went through that petition, the first impression I got was that this was not a commonplace petitioner. It's not a commonplace guy. Because the attachments created an impression of a highly connected individual. Because he had phone data records of judges, allegedly talking to other lawyers who are directly involved in the case. And you could see the number of times they have spoken, the dates, the ID numbers of people involved in the conversation, their specific locations, and the amount of time the conversations took, but it was in seconds.
Several meetings later, the paper's editorial team decided to run with the story, and on the 19th of September, the Standard splashed it on its first page.
A petition is a privileged document. You can't do so much on it. You have to just stick in there, which is why we did not discuss anything outside that petition. But we made an observation, which I think we are allowed to make. you can see that the kind of detail in the content of that petition was not something that an ordinary person would get.
That same day, protests raged outside the court and in other parts of the country. On Twitter, a campaign against some of the judges was launched, echoing the sentiments of the protesters outside the court. On the opposite side, supporters spoke in defense of the majority judges. The political divide on this issue was clear. Mwaniki was on the spot for his story.
But criticism continues to be there. Issues of privacy, people saying that, phone data records are completely private and that there was intrusion on privacy.
Up until this point, the judiciary had maintained a conservative stance, carefully choosing which information to share and speaking out only when necessary.
You know what's interesting and stood out for me is the difference between these officials at the Supreme Court in this petition and in 2013. So in the sense, the officials within the Supreme Court, now even the Chief Registrar of the Supreme Court, the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, the Registrar of the Supreme Court, were not very open to giving information or press conferences. It was very formal. Email, this and that's all. Why? Because they felt they did not want to get caught up in the political psyche, that you may say something and then it comes back to haunt you.
But the protests had forced an otherwise introverted judiciary to speak out. Chief Justice David Maraga, as president of the Judicial Service Commission, spoke at the steps of the Supreme Court.
These demonstrations have bordered on violence and are clearly intended to intimidate the judiciary and the individual judges. On our part, we are prepared to pay the ultimate price to protect the Constitution and the rule of law.
But the JSC's harsh words did not sit well with many.
The problem is that they had taken a position. So depending on where you are sitting, if you are sitting on one end, you think that they are still propagating the same position. If you're on the other side, you think that they are fair.
When pressure like we've seen so far mounts up to the levels that we saw, I think it was imperative for the institution to come out and declare its standing and its rooting in the Constitution.
I think we are headed for tougher times because this is a court where literally almost everybody is having a problem. You will notice there was a petition against Chief Justice Maraga. There is an issue that is in High Court, I think, involving Justin Jokindongo, Jackton, and I think it also involved at one point Ibrahim. Then there is this new petitioner who is petitioning, against the Chief Justice. No, sorry, not Chief Justice. Supreme Court judges, two of them, Lenaola and Justice Muilu, Lady Justice Muilu. Now, the only person without an issue, as it were, would be smoking.
Bob Mkangi, a former member of the Committee of Experts on the Constitution, says the quest for an independent judiciary was expected to be put to test, especially during the most defining moments for the country.
The fact that Kenyans wanted a judiciary that was truly independent, they wanted a judiciary that was amenable to their needs, they wanted justice or a judiciary that was accessible and justice that was accessible. So all those were things that we ensured we remained true to, and what was in the Constitution really echoed and resonated with what Kenyans out there wanted.
Temperatures are rising as Kenya heads to the polls on August 8th.
Reports branded as the work of BBC and CNN have made the rounds on social media. Both included fake polling data suggesting the incumbent President Kenyatta was poised to win.
But the big question remains, has propaganda and fake news harmed the image of the current Supreme Court?
Harming it in terms of public perceptions, definitely that is there, and we've always seen this propaganda, fake, information going out there, not only to us a judiciary, but other institutions also, and especially those ones that play a critical role in the political sphere of the country. In terms of the longevity of the harm, I think again depends on how the institution and the people who serve the institution conduct themselves. I think if they remain steadfast to the law, to the constitution, to how they operate, in the long run, people will come to appreciate that all this, or some of the atmospherics were created to dent the image of the institution.
Now, 13 members shy